Forget the courtly dances and the chivalric jousts. Wipe the slate clean of every romanticized image you hold of the Middle Ages. You think you know what people did for fun when the Black Death was just a neighbor and central heating was a fantasy? You are profoundly, wonderfully wrong. Step back into a world where a severed hand could be a holy relic. A public execution was a picnic, and the ultimate spectator sport involved an entire town trying to catch a greased pig. Welcome to the grimy, glorious, and utterly bizarre reality of medieval amusement. The spectacle of suffering and the joy of the grotesque. The year is 1358. We are not in a castle with King Edward III. We are in the crowded, reeking, joyous heart of a marketplace in London. A public holiday has been declared, and the central square is thronged. Children are perched on their fathers' shoulders. Vendors are hawking warm ale and meat pies, and the atmosphere is electric with anticipation. What is the great draw? The grand finale of a town-wide archery contest? A traveling troupe of troubadours? No. The main event is a good old-fashioned, thoroughly bloody execution. To the modern mind, the idea of an execution, beheading, hanging, or, God forbid, drawing and quartering, being treated as a family-friendly festival is chilling. To the medieval person, it was a multi-layered, indispensable form of entertainment and civic duty.
The Carnival of Justice. Public executions were the blockbuster movie events of their time. They were the ultimate morality play, a stark, visceral reminder of the boundaries of society, often sanctioned by the church as a means of saving the criminal's soul. It wasn't just the main event that drew the crowds, it was the entire procession. The condemned, often dressed in a special garment, would be paraded through the streets on a cart, sometimes forced to wear a sign detailing their crimes. This procession was a show, an opportunity for the public to jeer, throw rotten food, or, occasionally, offer a final whispered prayer. The performance was so integral that a poor performance by the executioner, say, a clumsy swing of the axe that took multiple attempts, could result in the crowd turning on him for ruining the show. The goal was swift, clean, and dramatic justice. But the sheer oddity of the aftermath truly confounds the modern observer. Once the head was separated from the body, a curious spectacle often began. People would rush forward, not to flee, but to dip pieces of cloth into the fresh blood. Why? Because the blood of the executed, particularly if the person was deemed a repentant or a martyr, was thought to have healing properties. It was a bizarre mingling of macabre fascination, deep-seated superstition, and the ever-present search for a cure for the era's relentless ailments. And once the execution was complete, the fun continued. The square, already warm with ale and adrenaline, would quickly transition into a proper fair. Jugglers and acrobats who had paused their acts for the main event would resume. Merchants would capitalize on the captive audience. The day, having begun with death, would end with drinking, dancing, and general merriment. The juxtaposition of extreme violence and festive joy was a cornerstone of the medieval leisure experience.
The spectacle of the caged madman. The macabre did not stop with sanctioned justice. Mental illness was poorly understood and often viewed as demonic possession, or perhaps more usefully, as another form of public entertainment. Take, for instance, the infamous Bethlehem Royal Hospital in London, or Bedlam, as it was popularly known. By the late Middle Ages, it was transitioning from a charitable institution to an asylum for the mentally ill, but it had a unique, disturbing feature. For a small fee, often a penny, the public was allowed to wander the halls and observe the patients. This was less a visit to a modern museum and more a trip to a human zoo. People would spend their leisure time gawking at the inmates, some raving, some catatonic, some merely eccentric, treating their suffering as a day's diversion. Bedlam became so popular a destination that the money collected from the spectators helped fund the hospital. The patients were quite literally paying their own keep through their involuntary public performance. It was a deeply troubling form of passive entertainment that speaks volumes about the rough-hewn sensibility and lack of empathy characteristic of an age saturated with disease and early death.
One highly competitive and socially acceptable pastime was balking. This was not a sport of physical prowess, but a communal vigil. Along the coastlines of England, particularly, when the shoals of herring or other vital fish were expected, certain individuals, the balkers, would climb to high vantage points, often special towers or cliffs, and watch the sea for hours. When they spotted the fish, they would shout and signal to the waiting fishing boats below, using flags, horns, or hand signals. The thrill lay not just in the eventual catch, but in the highly visible, dramatic act of the spotting itself. The balker was a momentary hero, his sharp eyes and endurance applauded by the entire community, whose livelihood depended on his success. It was entertainment derived directly from the grim necessity of feeding oneself, a kind of high-stakes, community-fueled birdwatching. On land, the fun was often more brutal and visceral, while organized sports like football, a far more violent, sprawling version of the modern game, often involving hundreds of players and lasting for miles, and wrestling were popular. The games that truly captured the common imagination were the ones involving animals.
Animal fights and the pursuit of the greased pig. In a world where life was short and brutal, entertainment mirrored reality. The most popular sports were those that involved a high degree of risk, noise, and bloodshed. Animal sports were a consistent staple enjoyed by pauper and prince alike. The brutality of the bear and the bull. The term bear baiting is often evoked when discussing medieval entertainment, but the reality was more widespread and varied. Bear baiting involved chaining a captive bear to a stake in an arena, often with one of its legs tied to make escape impossible. A pack of dogs, specially bred, powerful mastiffs, would then be set upon it. Bets would be placed not just on the outcome, which the bear rarely survived, but on which dog would last the longest, or how many rounds the bear could endure. Cruelty was not a consideration. Endurance and viciousness were the metrics of success. The noise was incredible, the roaring of the bear, the barking and howling of the dogs, and the thunderous shouts of the audience. It was pure, unadulterated, primal energy. Bull baiting was equally popular, and often more dangerous for the spectators, as bulls were larger and stronger. However, the bull baiting had an oddly practical side, sometimes required by law. It was believed that the frantic action of the dogs running and tearing at the bull tenderized the meat, making it better for consumption. Thus, entertainment and food preparation were inextricably linked. The honorable sport of cock-throwing. Perhaps one of the most uniquely strange and indefensible pastimes was cock-throwing. This was a popular Shrovetide tradition, particularly among boys and young men. The object was simple, yet barbaric. A live rooster would be tied to a short stake. For a small wager, participants would take turns throwing sticks, clubs, or pieces of weighted wood at the poor creature until it was killed. If the rooster managed to escape or evade the throws, it was sometimes allowed to go free, though this was rare. The victorious thrower got to take the dead bird home as a prize. This wasn't an isolated incident of rural sadism. It was a celebrated tradition, often encouraged by schoolmasters as a way for students to let off steam before the piety of Lent began. The appeal lay in the difficulty of the target, the competitive spirit, and of course, the eventual prize of a meal. The elusive greased pig. For a more communal, less bloody, but equally raucous form of fun, nothing beat the simple anarchic joy of the greased pig chase.
A robust pig, often the fattest, quickest one in the village, would be caught, its body coated completely in lard or oil, and then released into the marketplace or a large enclosed field. The prize was the pig itself. The ensuing chaos was pure comedy. Men, women, and children would dive, slide, and tumble over each other in a desperate attempt to grab the slippery, squealing animal. The crowd loved watching the spectacle of their neighbors being covered in grease and mud, failing spectacularly. It was a classless, accessible form of fun that dissolved the usual social boundaries in a shared, messy, hilarious struggle. The pig, of course, often escaped the grasp of dozens of people before one lucky, or particularly sticky, person finally claimed their prize. Board games, gambling, and the occasional riot. When the weather turned foul or the sun went down, the medieval person turned indoors. But their appetite for competition and high-stakes drama remained. Board games and gambling became the primary indoor leisure activities, and the games they played were surprisingly sophisticated, sometimes surprisingly familiar, and always played with high passion. The game of kings and clerics. Chess, having been imported from the Islamic world, was wildly popular among the nobility and the educated clergy. It was not just a game, it was a symbolic reflection of the social order. The pieces, the king, the queen, a later addition, the bishop, the knight, the rook or castle, and the pawn mirrored the feudal hierarchy.
Playing chess was seen as a way to hone strategic and martial skills without drawing blood. It was considered an honorable pursuit, often used as a means of instruction for young nobles. But even this stately game had its moments of drama. Historical accounts record arguments and even fights breaking out over disputed moves or accusations of cheating, proof that even the most cerebral pastimes could ignite the medieval temper. Backgammon and the scourge of dice. Far more common than chess, especially among the lower classes, were games played with dice. The ancestor of modern backgammon, often called tables or taboulet in Latin, was a massive hit. It was fast-paced, combined strategy with pure chance, and, crucially, was easy to gamble on. Gambling was, in many ways, the great medieval leisure pursuit, the equivalent of modern-day sports betting and casino trips combined. The church and various authorities often condemned dice and gambling as immoral, leading to idleness, poverty, and vice. Yet, this only seemed to increase its allure. People would bet on everything: the outcome of dice rolls, the results of cockfights, the winner of a joust, or simply on the toss of a coin. Large fortunes could be won and lost in a single evening, often leading to exactly the kind of social discord the authorities feared. Quoits, nine men's maris, and the Ryer's ball game. For those seeking non-gambling indoor fun, there were simple, easily created games. Nine men's maris was a strategy game played on a board etched into stone, wood, or even a piece of leather. It was the common man's chess. Its rules are complex, but its setup is simple, making it a perfect tavern game.
Another popular game, quoits, was the medieval version of horseshoes, involving throwing rings over a stake. It was a game of simple skill, easily organized in any courtyard or back alley. But when the common folk truly wanted to let loose, they returned to the collective, chaotic energy of the ball games. The most riotous of these was a form of folk football, often played between two different parishes or villages. The pitch might be the miles of land between the two villages, the goals a designated point in each village square, and the rules were essentially, there are no rules. Broken limbs, fractured skulls, and even occasional deaths were not uncommon.
This wasn't just a game. It was a ritualistic expression of inter-village rivalry, a sanctioned outlet for pent-up aggression, and, above all, a magnificent spectacle for those hardy enough to watch. The game often ended not when a goal was scored, but when the sun went down or an actual riot was about to break out, blurring the line between sport and civil unrest.